My name's Nancy Connors, and you're joining us today online from Unity of Dallas, where we are continuing our study of reincarnation and life between lives based on the research of Michael Newton and his followers and colleagues. He has over 7,000 cases that he personally did. 7,000 regressions. Now, book 1 and 2 each have maybe, I think the first book has about 39 case studies that he cites, and the second book about the same number. The third book has even more, and this one has an interesting approach. This last book, dedicated to Michael Newton, his research team, they organized the book by theme. And I'll tell you what I mean. It's kind of a different way to approach it. The first section is called One Facing a Health Crisis, and there are case studies related to that. 2, Anxiety and Depression. Oh, you never heard of that, right? 3, Healing from Loss, after you've lost someone dear to you. 4, Navigating Romantic Relationships. 5, From Self-Sabotage to Strength. Chapter 6, Growing Through Family Conflict. 7, Nurturing Relationships. 8, Balancing Career and Finances. 9, Breaking Free. 10, Transformed by a Brush with Death. 11, Aging and Dying. And then the conclusion, which I will share with you at the end. But that's a different way to set the book up. You know, if you're really interested in one of those areas, you can just go right to it. But they have a whole list of therapists from around the world that would contribute a case study. And it would be included if that group thought it was worthwhile material. Now, I told you in August that I was going to go for a session of my own, and I did. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. This is not about me, but I want you to kind of understand the process. After reading the first 2 books, and then the third, I was very curious about the procedure and the process. I went to the website for the Michael Newton Institute, and I went under Texas. I think there was a pull down for where you lived, and they listed the trained regression therapist, and there was 1 in Dallas and 2 in Fort Worth. Okay, I felt drawn, even though it would have been handier here in Dallas. I drove an hour to Fort Worth, and I had my session with a man by the name of Richard Holder. When I sent him an email requesting an appointment, he texted me back and said, I'd like to do a phone conference before we set your appointment up. So he called, and we were on the phone an hour, and he was asking me lots of questions about my background, and that was really interesting. And when he found out that I'd been a student of the spiritual studies for 40-something years, I wasn't like a newbie like some of the people that come in. He said, I'm going to change up the format a little bit in your case. Normally, he said, you start with a separate appointment just on past life regressions, and then a second appointment where you get into the life between lives. But he combined that for me, and I was still there 4 hours. Okay, so the first, I arrived right on time. It was a 10 o'clock appointment on a Friday morning. We just sat and talked for 45 minutes or so. He kind of explained, this is what we're going to do. And it was familiar to me from the books. And he said, when people come to me that have read the books, sometimes they have high expectations that it's going to be just like the book. And I said, well, I realize that's not going to happen. He said, just remember, Newton had over 7,000 tape-recorded sessions, and he picks about the 100 of the most interesting and best ones to publish. And he said occasionally he's had a client that could not even get into the hypnosis, but that was rare. But he said the number one question people ask me afterwards is, how do I know I didn't make all this up? And I knew that from the books because a lot of people had said that. And what I've come to realize is that your imagination is your intuition. I mean, think about that. Things that you might think, oh, that's just, my imagination. But where's it coming from? It's from your intuitive self. So anyway, he had a big, comfortable recliner chair, glass of water, a box of Kleenex, which I didn't need, but I guess some people do. And he did how many of you have been hypnotized? Any of you? Okay, I'd say about half of you. I have once, 30-something years ago, and I had a similar experience. They tell you to relax your face, your arms, and you go through about all this relaxing, and then take deep breaths, and then they have you count backwards, and you're supposedly gone, under. And he said some people literally slump over in the chair, and they're just like they're unconscious. But I don't react that way. Both years ago and this time, for me, it's very similar to meditation. I knew everything going on in the room. He and I talked throughout the whole session and chatted back and forth. I did keep my eyes closed, and I did see things in the video in my head. And I'm pretty good at that because I've had a lot of years of practice with meditation. So I'm very good at videoing and seeing things. So he took me back to my childhood. Well, he didn't even need to hypnotize me for that. I mean, I could have told him. I do know my earliest childhood memory and things like that. But then he had me in my mother's womb, and he didn't spend much there. I didn't have much to say. I told him it was hot and crowded. But anyway, we got into the last life, and I have tapped into this last life somewhere along the years, and I always wondered, just like he said, am I making this up? Maybe I've read too many things. But when you find out you worked with Ledbetter in India and you were a secretary in the Theosophist office, you do wonder if you've made it up. Evidently not, okay? So that explains to those of you that have been with me all year why I have this utter fascination with Ledbetter's books and the Theosophists, because I had a background with them. And I got a lot more detail in this encounter about that particular lifetime, okay? So the whole part, now you can start looking at your list of what happens when you are taken into that super consciousness. Now, remember that we learned that regular hypnosis is your subconscious. What Newton explains in his book is that when he takes people deeper into the past between the lives, which is something I knew nothing about before the Newton books, that's the super consciousness. So he skipped pretty quickly over the first two steps for me. And the first step about leaving the body, and we remember from last class that the soul leaves the body by coming out of the top of the head. And a lot of individuals have no idea they're dead because they can still hear and see. And a lot of them are very confused. And I read you a passage last month about the person saying, wait, I'm not dead. Why are they pulling a sheet over my face? But anyway, that first step after death, before the person decides to leave the physical world. Now, I want to emphasize, you have a choice. Every one of these steps, you have choices and freedom. We're greatly influenced by our childhood upbringing and our culture. If you expect to go to St. Peter and pearly gates, that's exactly what's going to happen for you. If you think you deserve hell and you're going to hell, I'm sorry to tell you, you'll create that. So it's what your expectation is. I don't know about all of you watching this, but most of us here at Unity of Dallas have had some church background in our lives. I grew up in a wonderful family that went to church every week, and it was a pretty progressive Protestant church. And I'm very grateful I had that background because it prepared me to want to know more and to go deeper. And there are a lot of us here at Unity that have come from Catholic Church, Judaism, Muslim. We've got people that grew up Southern Baptist, Presbyterian. Somehow we've found our way here to Unity of Dallas. And I think that how that happens for those of us that are here, because it's no accident you're here. Something made you choose to attend this class, to be here today when you could be watching football. But you're here because there's something in you that's yearning to know more and to go deeper. And this is one of the first classes at Unity that we've had that has done what we call a deep dive. And some people don't want any part of it. Other people call it woo-woo. And then there's those of us in this room that we'd meet every day if we could. So there's a wide range. I think the thing that has caused so many young people to avoid any kind of church, for lack of a better word, is all the dogma and the rules and some of the ridiculous things you're taught, like being born as a baby in original sin. Does that make, that makes no sense. My husband was telling me about that earlier because he grew up in a Catholic family. And he said the minute he heard that, he thought, no, that can't be right, you know. So no matter where you come from, you may have had some questions about the rules, the regulations, the dogmas, the threats that existed in some churches. I'm lucky that the church I grew up in, I never heard the word sin or hell. It was a very open, kind of progressive Protestant church in the Midwest. And I had wonderful youth classes that I went to and Sunday school and all that growing up. And I'm very grateful that I chose the parents that I did. So anyway, back to where we are. When I was having my session with Richard, the hypnotherapist, we went through the gateway very quickly. Now, the minute the body dies, you shed that physical exterior. That's death number 1. We actually go through 3 deaths. Most people that are not awakened think that's the only death there is the physical death, because they don't realize that the real life is not the body, it's the soul. The soul is clothed in a body. And we talked about that. Ledbetter said when you die, you take off that overcoat, put it to the side. In Ellen Davenport's book, she called it a spacesuit that you wear. But when you put that physical body aside, you're probably more alive than you've ever been. Now, in theosophy teachings, the next stage is in the astral plane. I don't think I ever read those terms in the Newton material. He does not talk about that language. The vocabulary is different. He doesn't have any of his clients that use the word plane. They just talk about how they were suddenly very free and that they could float and travel very quickly. And all of that is the astral body. So the astral body, you're going to keep that body as long as you choose to stay in that realm. Now, how do we distinguish planes or levels? It's by vibratory rate and your level of thinking and how developed you are. So the people that want to hang around Earth, check out their funeral, see how their loved ones are doing. If they had physical addictions, an alcoholic might hang around bars. There's all kinds of things that can happen in the astral depending on your karma, your level of development, and your vibratory rate. So the next level of development is to raise your vibratory rate. And I think those of us that study these topics while we're still here right now, we're going to be a lot more prepared when we cross over. I want to make a very quick beeline to my cluster group, okay? But the steps are all stated here. So you go through that tunnel, the light, people have called it different things. You've been hearing about that for years. So we're still now entering the astral realm because we've decided to leave the physical behind and go through that tunnel. And you're immediately met by some sort of a guide. And I will share this with you because it was so unexpected. I really have no idea who my main guide is. And you all have one primary guide that stays with you through eternity, evidently. And this gets to be kind of interesting for me because I'm still questioning some of what happened. So I'm immediately met by a guide that I knew was male. He told me a name, a common American name that I don't know one person with that name. But you know, it's a name I've heard. It's an English American name. And that person was my tour guide for the rest of this meditation. I come back and I am talking to a very close friend about this session, a male friend, and I find out that's his middle name. Really? That just blew me away, and it blew him away too, because I'm thinking now, how could that have been a guide over there greeting me when I know that person is in the physical? Or is it just a coincidence? I don't believe in coincidence, or really, there's no such thing. Well, the more you read, and we're going to get to this in a few minutes, it is very common and normal that we split our soul energy. You don't come from, I'll call it the heaven world for lack of a better term. When we come and choose to be incarnated in the physical to planet Earth, you leave a percentage of your soul back behind. And that also explains that it is possible, but not common, to actually split the remaining energy and do parallel lives. I've always struggled with that idea of parallel lives. I just find it's not an easy concept. But Newton had 2 or 3 clients that he writes about that were experiencing parallel lives. And it doesn't sound easy. It'd be like taking 2 advanced classes at the same time. And you're trying to, you know, balance both and make good decisions. And people that choose to do it are really ramping up their growth. They're trying to get ahead quickly. But I'll read a passage about that a little later. So, okay, I met this guide who remained with me, and before my session, I was told to write down questions I wanted answered, and 4 or 5. So the first thing the guide does is take me to my cluster group. And that whole concept of our karmic groups is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Newton material. You literally kind of quickly zoom through the air. Almost sounds like you're flying. But of course you don't have a physical body. And you're taken to what all these clients describe as a gigantic sphere. But it never ends. It's infinity. This sphere shape has no ending, no walls that you can see. And you travel very quickly, and there are all these little pods. And as you're traveling along and from kind of up above, you see people in every one of them as you go by. And those are all the thousands of karmic soul groups. Soul groups. And there's a diagram in Journey of the Souls about how this, and didn't try to draw it or reproduce it, but it's concentric circles. The big circle is usually about 1,000 entities. And those are people you're going to run around and find, you're going to come across them all through your lives. The big karmic group. But then the smaller group within that, the very smallest, is your cluster group. That's your group that could be as much as 30 people, but it's normally 10 or less. That's your best friends, your best connections. And you've probably had life after life with these people in different roles. But other people from other clusters can also appear in your life. Not everyone that was in a regression session, when they were describing someone, they found out, oh, that person's not part of my karmic group. They were from the other group or something. So there is some moving around. But one of his clients in one of the early books said the whole layout looked like a beehive of all these little, compartments with people in them talking, meeting, laughing. And I was going through this, and I remember Richard, the therapist, he said, I want you to go down a hallway. And I immediately could see that hallway. And he said, there are all these doors. You're going down a hallway, and there's doors on the right, and there's doors to the left. I want you to go to your doorway. I immediately knew it was not any of them. It was the one on the very end. And so I went through that door, and there was my cluster group. So I'm just telling you what I saw in my head. And when I got in there, they were all, she's back, and they're all excited and everything. And anyway, I spent some time there, and I won't go through the details. I recognized some of the people as people I know or have known in this life. And after we were there for a little bit, Richard took me to, where'd we go next? We went out for a little journey in space, and we just kind of flew around in space and looked at some other planets and saw some of the planets have no population, others do, but we didn't make any stops, but that was wonderful. And then we ended up, one of my questions was about, have I fulfilled my karmic debts in this life? So, but before we got there, I had a meeting with some space brothers, and I've never even talked about any of that aspect of spiritual life to you all, but that's a whole nother set of classes. I had met with these individuals once 35 years ago, and so I knew who they were, and they were sitting behind a semicircular table, and all I could see is their silhouette. They had no facial features. They had very smooth, elongated bodies and heads, and they told me 35 years ago, the first time I met with them, and I was a classroom teacher in Dallas, they told me they wanted me to, they named 4 of my students, and they wanted me, when I was teaching those kids, to put my hand on their shoulder to awaken them. And I did it. I have no idea how any of that worked out for those kids. But this time, they're telling me the same thing, that I need to be doing more of that with adults in my life to awaken them. And I agreed and said, okay. And I said, well, can you tell me about my karmic debts? They said, that's not our department. And I thought that made it so realistic, because it really wasn't. The Space Brothers are not very concerned about individual human evolution and growth. Their concern is about getting planet Earth on track, because we know we're the 37th planet in our system, and we're the only remedial one left. And that's why this work as light workers is critical right now. We have got to get this planet vibrating at the level for the 5th dimension. And we're on our way, but there's still a lot of work, and that's why recruiting light workers is so critical right now. Because to me, you all and anyone else out there that is already aware and knows the power of our being and that the God is within, we're the ones that need to help awaken the others. And we can't do it on a street corner, standing out and yelling, you know, I have the answers. And so how do we do it? See, that's the tricky part. How do we awaken friends and family? So one way, evidently, is to do more with our energy. And even touching someone on the shoulder can help. And you don't have to say anything out loud, just send very strong mental thoughts as you do it. You know, I awaken you to your true reality, or whatever you want to think, okay? So after that visit with the Space Brothers, we went in front of another panel, and I was able to ask some questions about karma and get some answers. I won't go into all that, but I'm just telling you what you can kind of expect if you go for a session. And coming out of it, I was very surprised at all that part where he was there and he and I were talking and he's asking me stuff and I'm answering it. That lasted about 2 hours. Time went very quickly. And so afterwards, you know, he had me drink a glass of water and we kind of chatted a few minutes and debriefed. And I had an hour drive home, so I had a lot of time to think about it. And I think he was concerned that I didn't get anything out of it. So he and I exchanged a couple of emails, and I bulleted. I said, here's my takeaway. And and probably the number one takeaway for me was to have a lot more faith that all the things I think intuitively are right. That the things I've experienced in past life through meditations and dreams, it's authentic, because I had several of those things authenticated in this session with him. So that's what my takeaway was. So all of you have that ability, and I know a lot of you are already doing this kind of work. Another takeaway, and I've mentioned it in the class before, I've been really able to enhance my mental telepathy ability. And all it requires, really, is for you and somebody. I'm only doing it with people that are in the spiritual world. I know Derek went to a conference about doing this mental telepathy with other people around the United States. But the trick is you've got to be on the same wavelength. So my teacher, who passed over in April, Carol Parrish, I really still look at her as my primary teacher. So when I want to communicate with her, I think in my head, Carol, are you there? And if she answers, then she and I start, you know, because I was thinking about her this morning as I drove here, and I thought, Carol, are you there? I need you to be with me in teaching this class today. You know, help me know the right things to say, and that kind of thing. You can also do something similar with automatic writing, where you get into your focus and get centered and let the outside world go away, and you think and you call on guides. And I've had all different people show up for this, so I don't know if they're guides or what, but I'll say, is anybody there? Yes, this is Benjamin. Oh, okay, Benjamin, you know, whoever it is. And I'll ask and they'll answer, and I type what I'm getting. And that can be effective also. And a lot of these people that have served as the mediums, if you want to say that word, the secretaries, the scripts, the ones that do the writing for the books, that's how it's done. The Alice Bailey material, if you're familiar with that came out, it's been over 100 years ago. Master D.K. Dwakul, he came to Alice Bailey over a series of years and dictated those books, and they're very advanced. They're not easy reading. And there are about 19 or 20 of them. They're in navy blue covers. You can get them in paperback. And you can get lucky and find them at half-price books. I have most of them, not all of them. I haven't read very many of them. They're very Very heavy reading, but they're very good. So the same thing with the Ledbetter material, the material that came from the Theosophists. A lot of that was dictated to someone. Remember when we did the Master Hilarion book on all the things to watch out for, the challenges and tests we're going to face? All that came through a man named Morris Cook in Canada. He transcribed all that from Master H. So that works very well. Okay, so looking down, all the rest of these are steps that not every session with a hypnotherapist is going to include every one of these steps. But this is what, in general, is what you can expect. Remember that in Book 1, Journey of the Souls, Newton, after several hundreds of these sessions, he categorized his clients according to what he felt was their level of development. And Newton was not right about everything, and Richard Holder told me the same thing. Newton grew and learned as he did this work. But he decided there were two levels of beginners. The beginner, what you would call a young soul that had hardly had any lifetimes yet. And how they're distinguished is by color. Now this is not an aura, it's something different, but the rookies were white. Their color is white. Now let's back up one step. Where do they come from? Well, new souls are being born and created all the time. I guess I never realized that they're constantly being created. And this ties in with what we learned in Explorer's class this morning from Roger's class. Where does that soul come from? It's a spark of energy. The Theosophists and people I've studied would call it the monad, M-O-N-A-D, the monad, but it's literally a spark of the Creator. Newton does not use the word God in his books because his clients always called the maker or the source. So that spark of life that creates that initial soul is literally part of the source. So when we start reading the 5 principles next month and find out that God is within, is the second principle, that's literally true because our soul was created from a spark of the ultimate consciousness, the source. So that's important to keep in mind. So once that baby soul is created, one of the jobs that we'll get to in a minute, there's incubators, there's nurseries in the inner planes for birthing new souls and getting them to a level where they can start to operate. So, I mean, it's just amazing how organized and easy to understand the spiritual world is. I just never dreamed that it was so well organized. And it's really reassuring because I think a lot of us wondered what the afterlife was going to be like, and it sounds pretty great. Level 1 then are brand new souls, baby souls, and their color's white. Then there's advanced or intermediate beginners, level 2. And you can see over there on the left side that bolded level 2. So these are still white souls, but they start to have some yellow tinges. Okay? And that shows that they're a little more developed. They may have had a few lifetimes and so on. So the more developed a soul gets, the more job opportunities are available. Okay? A level 3 soul, he calls mature and advanced souls. And again, this comes from the Blue Book, Journey of the Souls. And I'll come back to these jobs in a moment. When he wrote Journey of the Souls, all of his clients had been levels 1, 2, or 3. He hadn't run into any advanced ones. Now why? Well, who comes for therapy? Probably people that have a lot of questions and don't have a total understanding of life and so on. But when he got to the second book a few years later, he had clients that were level 4. I don't know if he's ever had well, he would have in some of these roles, very highly evolved ones. But the level 3 soul is mostly yellow, but has some tinges of blue entering in. And again, not their aura, but the color of the soul itself, the color they emanate, put out. And then the level 4, these are really advanced ones, and they're blue. They're blue. There's even another level, and we'll get to some of them. I didn't even put it on here, but the very top level on these human incarnations are purple. And that's why so many of us know that spiritual colors, you see a lot of deep purple. It's a very spiritual color. And if you want to align this with what we've done in earlier classes on initiations, my guess is that at level 4 and 5 would be 5th degree initiates, especially if they're in purple robes. They're going to be 5th degree initiates. There are other initiations beyond the ones we studied. We only studied the human initiations. There's a whole nother level of solar initiations that are even beyond. So it's like a never-ending road of evolution. This goes on through infinity. So lots for us to learn. Now let's look at some of the jobs. Okay, you're a rookie, you're a level 1. What are some of the things you can do? You can be a greeter and help be in the reception of people coming in. You can help with orientation. You can work with those incubators with the little embryo souls, or do some counseling, probably of other beginners, since you're kind of a beginner yourself. But then by level 2, the roles get a little more sophisticated. You can be a spirit guide, a soul teacher, an instructor, healing specialist, energy trainers, and I'm going to talk about that one in a minute, and then rejuvenation technician. Remember in our class last month, and I had a couple of people tell me they left feeling so much better than when they came in, because there is no such thing as being punished. You're never doomed as a soul. There is no hell unless you imagine it and create it for yourself. But I remember sharing with you in August the case of one of the clients that came to one of the counselors, and maybe it was to Newton. This entity had been a male, and he'd been a rapist and a murderer. I mean, he'd been about as what we'd think of bad as you can be, right? And when the minute he gets into that next level in the astral world, oh my goodness. He realizes, because we are coming in with a contract that we designed for ourselves. We have a purpose in our life. And I've asked all of you to work hard on identifying what your role and purpose is in this life. That's important to figure out. Well, when we cross over and we go to that first review, the early review is right after you cross over. You review the life you just left. And you're going to have that video in your head of all the things you did, and I hope you'll feel good about it. But there'll probably be some things you're not pleased with. Oh boy, I wish I hadn't done that or said this. But people that have done atrocious things, you can imagine, you'd think, oh my gosh, I'm dead. I'm going to be executed. I'm going to get the death penalty. And there's no such thing. There's no such thing. What they do instead is rejuvenate that soul. And if the person was really off track, like the rapist murderer, they actually restructure that soul And it's all done through energy work, and the explanations are pretty scientific and complicated, beyond my scientific background. But there's people that are advanced, and they're trained in advanced use of energy and technology. So there's nobody that should be hopeless. We all have the ability to, everybody's cleansed. You know, they come from Earth, and heavens knows what all you've picked up while you've been here. Negative thought forms and, you know, so much, especially right now on our planet, about negative thought forms and fear and worry and anxiety. And so you're cleansed, you know, and you go through almost a shower of energy, and that must feel so good to be rejuvenated like that. So that's what happens in level 2, the rejuvenation and energy trainers. And now let's go to level 3. Now we're getting into some people with pretty strong background. I suspect a lot of you are in this group. And this is mature, and that should be a D, advanced souls. So people that have really worked to overcome karmic debts, and the main thing that I get from all my years of study, the main thing the hierarchy's looking for, and the spiritual guides and the council of elders, the lords of karma, they're looking for people who care about the human race as a whole. It's not how well I am as an individual. There are no individual initiations anymore. They're all group. They started only group initiations within the last, I'm going to say 50 years is my understanding. So we have to go forward together, people. You can't, and even that despicable person that drives you crazy needs to get in line. And we've talked about this. I've used the metaphor of having one hand forward and one back to bring people along. And one of the books I read, I think it was a Ledbetter book, maybe not, but they talked about the cars on a train. There'll be an engine way up there leading that group, but we all need to be on the track together. So any judgment you have about who's good and who's bad, we got to let go of that kind of thinking. We want to reach out and help all of humanity, and that's the role of light workers. And I dub you each a light worker, because that's what we're here about. And it's not about being sanctimonious and feeling superior. It's about helping people wake up to who they really are, okay? And there's so much need for that. And we've talked before about millennials in particular just seem to have very high levels of stress. A lot of them have no spiritual background because they didn't grow up like I did in the 50s going to church. There's so many that suicide rates way up. The number of people, they want to either escape through suicide, through drugs, through alcohol. Those are the big three. Find a way, this is too painful, because it's not an easy place. We know that. But we each chose to be here because we wanted to be tested. I'm strong. I know I can handle it. I'm going in. And I'm volunteering to do whatever you need me to do in that life. And you work that out before you reincarnate. So we've chosen to be here. And so many people don't even remember that. They'll say, oh, there's only one life. I had a woman tell me recently, I don't believe in any of that stuff. So it's sad. And all we can do is try to exemplify people that are not judgmental, people that are calm. There's a lot going on. I just was talking with Derek, some stuff that's come out. Evidently, the next 2 months are going to be pretty challenging for a lot of people, and all you have to do is turn the news on and you'll see what I mean. So you can get all worried or take a political stand this way or that, but the main thing is to be balanced and calm and reassure that it's all going to be okay. At Unity, we say everything's in divine order. So things that look chaotic and feel it, maybe that has to happen before we break through to the golden age. Harmonic convergence, August 1987, is when the shift began, leaving the Piscean age behind. And it's been this period we're going through now. We're closer to the end. It's supposed to be the conclusion that we will have arrived in the age of Aquarius, and the transition will be over in 2040. But this period we're in right now is really ramping up. And you hear it every night on the news, and it's really easy to get discouraged. But just keep calm, keep positive, shine your light, spread your energy, and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So let's look then under level 4, the elders. Now this is a very high level job. Oh, I skipped over level 3, I beg your pardon. Let me go back to level 3. Primary guides come from that level, and that's a long-term mentor of a soul group. So that person's not just one-on-one, evidently works with the whole group. Group cluster leaders. Now remember, that's your small group. Let's just say it's a dozen people. Could be a little bigger or a little smaller. But that's the group that's going to be welcoming you and so happy to see you when you cross over. And I enjoyed that part of my regression where I got to stay and visit for a few minutes. Probably every cluster group has different assignments of what they work on. Anyway, I asked them when I got there, well, what they were working on, but they wanted to know what I was doing. So we had kind of a little exchange about that. But planning and incarnation advisors. Remember, when you decide it's time to tackle another life and go back, and you cannot quit going back until you've fulfilled your karmic debts. And they don't often come in one big lesson. They may be small lessons over several lives. But you cannot drop out of school, Earth. You cannot drop out. And someone asked me last time, well, why would I ever choose a horrible life and poverty? Well, it's one of the requirements on your degree plan. Okay, you've got to tackle the things that you need to address. And a lot of times that means you have to pick a life that's not going to be easy. Don't you notice even in your own life, when everything's going well, you kind of coast? Yeah, everything's going great. I remember asking my teacher, Carol Parrish, back in the early 80s when I lived in her community. I was in a small class, there were only about 6 or 7 of us. I was so fortunate to get to study with her. And I said, Carol, why are we here and there are all these people out there that aren't? And I was surprised at her answer. Pain. Pain? And then I started to think about it. If you're real in that, oh, everything's great and just coasting along, you don't look for anything deeper or more. But when you start thinking, is this all there is? You know, this is kind of boring and it's not going, that's when you start really looking inside. So I thought that was a really interesting answer. And when you ask people, when did you awaken? They'll usually say some event that, you know, was a wake-up call. And then I also like what my teacher used to say, when you take these classes, you're coming to know what you already know. It's already in you. We've all had all these lives. The soul remembers all of them. We get amnesia because it's too much for us to come into the world remembering all of them. But they're there. And I remember when I was talking to Carol about that, and at the time I was in my 30s, she said, you'll be in your 60s by the time you've recapitulated all your prior knowledge. I thought, oh, that seemed like a long time in the future, but it got here quickly. And then the new learning that you're going to take forward next time. So anyway, under level 3, When we decide we want to go back for the next incarnation, remember in our last class we learned that you go into that room that the clients all called a ring, and it was circular, and there were lifetime choices being displayed on big video screens, usually 3 or 4 options. So these advisors pre-screen and narrow it down for you so that you don't have to just think up some life. All right, we've looked at your karmic debts and what you need to balance out, and we think you could go back as a male in Asia and or you might like this one over here. You would be in this particular and they go through them and they actually show you scenes. And one of the persons that was regressed said you could actually put yourself into the video and experience it a little bit. Boy, that sounded kind of neat, but you don't see the whole thing. But you kind of have an idea it's going to be a very short life or a long one, or it's not going to be too easy, or you're going to have certain challenges. But you get to choose. You're going to choose your parents, your lessons, your race, your gender. That's why it's so ridiculous to have any kind of prejudices about sexuality and race and all that. We've all been all of it and done all of it, so why would you judge others? So again, what I want to stress is it's your choice. If you don't feel up to a challenge and you want to coast, pick one. They'll always give you an easy one to pick. But if you're interested in progressing more quickly, you'll pick one that is more of a challenge. I have read in other books that lives, that we look at someone that's handicapped, maybe mentally challenged, has some sort of a terminal illness, those bodies are in high demand.
Really?
Yeah, because you can learn tough lessons in them. And I mentioned last month, it came up about stillborn babies, abortion. When a soul chooses one of those bodies, they know going in that it's going to be a very short life. In fact, in the case of a fetus, because most abortions have to take place before the 4th month of pregnancy, there's not a soul in that fetus yet. The fetus doesn't usually, now this is usually, enter the body until the 4th, 5th, or 6th month. Why? Because the human brain needs to have started to develop in that baby. Because the first thing the soul has to do is get in sync with that brain. They have to work together. One of the clients reported when they went into a fetus and the therapist said, well, what did you do? Oh, the first thing I did was send energy up and down the spinal column of the fetus. Okay. So again, lives like that, where maybe you know that you're only going to be in the physical for 5 years or for this. Maybe an entity chooses a short life knowing they'll die of leukemia at age 5 because the parents need a lesson in learning how to recover from loss. So sometimes we pick a life to help out other members of our soul group. And we have agreements before we go in. And we don't remember that. That amnesia is tricky. You know, you come out of the birth canal and you don't remember any of this. But even in my session where I did have that 2-hour visit to the spiritual world, when I got to my cluster group, one person immediately came up and said, I'm sorry. And it was somebody I'd had a difficult time with earlier in this life. So I thought, that's interesting. And then I remembered we had an agreement about it. So, oh yeah, that was supposed to happen. Because we don't remember that, you know, that we've made an agreement.
Why is she apologizing if it was supposed to?
Just because of the pain, you know, you go through. Even though it was supposed to happen, you don't remember, and it's still painful, you know, if you lose someone or they go a different way, all that kind of thing. So it's very interesting on how the lives we pick depend on our karma and your ambition, how quickly you want to evolve. And these cluster groups are all on the same level. If one person starts getting moved ahead, then the others will quickly catch up. But you stay together with that cluster group for many, many, many lives. I don't know exactly how that all ends, but obviously it evolves, okay? So what else is in level 3? A compatibility matcher. Facilitates alignment with soulmates, twin flames, or karmic patterns. Okay, and I don't know much about twin flames. I know I saw the words in a book, but I'm not going to talk about that today. Let's go to level 4. Now these are, level 4 are advanced humans who are now in the spiritual world. They will be in the color blue. And the Council of Elders, probably one of the highest level jobs at this point. We had a life review. We come through that tunnel. Somebody greets us. They take us to get refreshed and cleansed. And then you go into a life review panel of just that one life. And then you go on to your cluster group and do things and study and learn and so on. When you decide that you're ready to go back to Earth, because you know you still need to, then you have to go to the Council of Elders. And people that talked about it in their therapy sessions were a little more nervous. It's like, ooh, I'm going to the front of the Supreme Court to plea my case. But when they got in there, they found out it was very loving and non-judgmental, and they left feeling good, okay? But the councils, whether it's the first one or this last one, they tend to ask open-ended questions. How do you think you did? What do you think you could have done differently? And they give, you know, options. It's not like they give you a lecture and reprimand you and they keep a list of everything naughty and nice like Santa, you know, no. It's very supportive and helpful so that when you go in, you should, and hopefully we can start to remember some of this as we develop, we kind of know why we're here. So that's why I've asked you to figure out what your life's purpose is this time. Now, at least half of you said you do know that, and you've known it all for a long time. But I know some of you, and probably, well, I don't even know if age makes a difference, but it's important to think about why you're here. Why did I choose to come and be here in this lifetime? And it can be, you know, what you think of as a pretty everyday rule. Maybe you came to be a good parent. That's still a purpose, you know. Not everyone came to be the new pope, you know. It's just whatever your mission, whatever your spiritual contract, you want to make sure you're working on that and fulfilling it. And meditation is one of the best ways to get in touch with that. Look at your dreams. About, you know, what you're dreaming, and that should help as well. There are archivists and librarians. There's the Hall of Records and there's a Hall of Learning. Those are both actual locations in the spiritual world. I told you in the last class that I'm very, very intrigued with the library concept because it reminds me of law school, where people were around tables and they would go to the shelf to pick their book. And in that book, there are not words on pages, there are actual pages that are like video screens. Environmental architects create healing temples or holographic spaces for soul growth. So a lot of you may feel drawn to a particular job because that's what you do in this life. Someone that's had a lot of lives as a doctor or a nurse or a healer will be attracted to that role. I'm a teacher, and I've always been a teacher in this life, classroom teacher, and that will still attract me probably in the future if they'll accept me. So teaching is another one. Designer, that builds symbolic environments or learning landscapes. Wow. Messengers, karmic or destiny recorders. And those people record and track your karmic debts and your soul growth metrics. Wow. Transition and death facilitators that actually guide the soul through physical death and help them smooth that way. I think that'd be a nice role. Then there are the ones that want to do more interplanetary work. This is very advanced souls tasked with seeding consciousness of studying life forms on other worlds. There's so many other life forms out there. How anyone can think we're the only planet with any life is beyond me. So there's many, many, many other inhabited planets and forms of life we might not even recognize as life. And then technicians. These are the ones that perform soul surgery when severe trauma or fragmentation occurs. So people that, like that man we talked about earlier who had been a murderer and done all kinds of terrible things, he would get a lot of structural help. Now, other than these jobs, and again, I used AI to pull all these, it would have taken me hours to go through those first 2 books and find every job. And there are probably other jobs that aren't on here. But then I added on my own some bonus areas. These aren't jobs, these are things you might want to know about. The Hall of Records, where all soul experiences are archived. And that's that library that we've talked about. Your soul remembers every experience it's had. We just aren't able to recall it in our physical form. There are rejuvenation centers, energetic hospitals for healing and soul renewal. There are planning rooms where you can map out future incarnations and build timelines and design lessons for yourself. The soul classrooms where you learn about ethics and energy use, universal laws. The work on energy is really, I think, important. I'd like to learn more about that myself. And there's a lot in the later books about people using energy and learning to manipulate it. And there's a lot of science in those pages. But again, more advanced ones can take on some of that as a challenge to learn more about it. We know what the ring is. That's almost like a little amphitheater where you go and see the circular room with all the potential lives. And then we know about the nursery, specially designed spaces where newly created souls are nurtured, educated, and gradually introduced to consciousness. Cosmic kindergartens. I love that. What questions do you have about this material? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how can we take what we're learning from these lives between lives, how do we translate it into the here and now? I mean, isn't that what you're really in here to find out? How can this group of us develop to the light workers that we want to be to help all the humanity that is struggling? They don't realize a split's on the horizon. They don't know they need to get into the game to up their vibratory rate. Some thoughts for many of you, and I'll repeat the questions for the camera if you have a comment or a question. Are any of you talking to family members? Dory, I know you're trying to. Dory's called me this week about help, so-and-so, and we've talked a little bit. But if you know someone, and I think a lot of us do, she has a friend that is maybe struggling almost near the end of her life. And a lot of people, when they get near death, they are so scared. There's so much fear. People need permission to leave. We told my dad that. My dad was in a coma the last week of his life in hospice. I thought it was great that a World War II veteran, had lived 87 years. He fell, and we got called to immediately go over to assisted living where he lived, and he had a little cut on his head. He never regained consciousness, and we had already signed up for hospice, and the hospice woman was very experienced. I talked with her a lot, and we didn't know how long he was going to linger. And she said, you know, I've done so many of these experiences. She said, people tend to die when the family leaves the room or they're distracted. And she said, I think it's because they don't want the family to feel bad or whatever. I have a brother in California who had not seen Dad in 2 or 3 years. My brother was a dentist, and it was hard for him to cancel all of his appointments and come. Well, he called every day, how's Dad? And I didn't know what to tell him. I said, he may live another hour or another week. I have no way of telling you. Well, finally, after 3 or 4 days, he said, I'm coming Saturday. I've got a flight. And anyway, I went back into my dad's room and sat next to him and leaned over, and I was always holding his hand. I said, Dad, Bob's coming Saturday to see you. All of his vital signs went up. Heart rate, everything increased and improved. So I knew that he'd been hanging on for that visit. My brother came in on Saturday. We had a wonderful 24 hours. Sunday we were there, my sister, brother, and I, and our husbands. And we decided to go home and take a break, and guess what happened? Dad decided to go. So it was just textbook, you know, but he really perked up when he knew my brother was coming to say goodbye. So if people are what you people in coma can hear everything, people. You know, they know, because you hear these people that do these regressions say, they thought I couldn't hear, but I knew, you know. They do hear, you know, what you're saying. And you can tell them goodbye, and, you know, a lot of times people want to know the other members of the family are going to be okay. You know, we're going to take care of, when my mother died, we're going to take care of Dad, you can go, it's okay, you know, or the dog, or whatever meant something to them. A lot of the people that are the most regretful are the ones that die earlier than they expected, and they leave a young family behind. And there were lots of cases in the books where the person did not want to go through the tunnel and leave until they were sure that that family was okay. So that makes sense. I can understand that. A woman who was not all that old, you know, let's say 40, she had been in a coma for years and years, and her parents refused to agree to them turning the machines off. And finally, the husband, who did not want to continue this, he finally took it to court. And there, some of you are nodding, you remember this case. Anyway, the court agreed. I mean, it'd been like 15 or 20 years, this woman, and there was no brain activity. But the family, the parents, could not let go. But the judge ruled that, yes, they could. Well, when they disconnected her and she was pronounced dead, they did an autopsy, and the results showed that her brain had shrunken to the size of a little nut. So the parents were just keeping a shell alive, not the entity. Another thing I've read here in the books and heard in this regressions, a lot of people that encounter a really painful killing or some violent death, they leave the body right as it happens, and they don't experience the pain and the trauma. We all want to do that, right? If you see the train coming and you can't get off the track, quick, exit. Well, before we wind down, and we're about to do that, I'm going to share a couple of passages. If this is the one where the person that came for the session started talking about parallel lives. Dr. Newton says, I have the impression you think the average soul is better off living one life at a time. And the subject said, I'd say yes in most instances, but there are other motivations to cause us to speed up our incarnations. The rewards for bunching up lives can allow for more reflection out of incarnation. And he said, well, doesn't it take longer? And she said, sure, it takes longer to reflect on 2 lives than 1. And Newton says, how do you see the manner in which you divide soul energy into various parts? And she says, we are particles of energized units. We originated out of 1 unit. And Newton says, what was the original unit? And she says, the maker, the source. And Newton says, do all parts of our soul energy go out of the spirit world when we incarnate? And the subject says, part of us never leaves the spiritual world. We do not totally separate from the maker. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, and there's more on that, and that's in the blue book on 154 if you happen to get the book. In the conclusion, I thought there were some things worth sharing here. Earth has many pleasures and is a beautiful place to be, but that's not why we as souls choose to incarnate here. We come here to learn and to experience. It's a school where we can grow and develop under the protection and tutelage of wise, benevolent beings. There's a whole system of support and guidance in place to enable us to do this. When we incarnate on Earth, an amnesia settles upon us that allows us to believe that we are the character we've chosen to be in one lifetime, and that our current experience is all that there is. Earth School requires us to adjust to being in a human body and negotiate with an ego we believe to be our real self. We are challenged to care and provide support for ourselves, to connect and cooperate with others, and to live our lives meaningfully. I'm skipping down a little bit. Challenging situations occur, and we observe good and evil in action. It's under these conditions that we have the potential to make rapid spiritual advancement. By facing the difficult, painful situations in our lives, we can find the gift of wisdom contained within them. And then going on another paragraph, talking about the authors, the counselors, all have one aim: to help you with challenges that confront you as an incarnated soul on this demanding planet. We hope you've been touched by some of the cases in this book, that you have received knowledge and wisdom that will lighten your load and encourage you to connect with your own inner wisdom. And on that, I think that's a good thing to close with. And next month, same thing, second Sunday, I would like for you to purchase the little book by Ellen Davenport that's the 5 Principles of Unity. She is a fabulous writer. This book is really, really well written. She's a journalist, that's her training. I want us to read about Principle 1 and 2. That's the first 55 pages. But like I said, it is not a very long book at all. And it's easy reading. Thank you for being here today. All right.